I'm Brendan ODonnell, president of Manhattan College, and I'm delighted to welcome you here. And we're delighted to be hosts for this wonderful event this afternoon. And I want to welcome all of our Lasallian colleagues from the Lasallian Association of Metropolitan Area Schools. I've been told that my function here is to deliver the Queen Wave. You know, the Queen Wave. But once you give me a podium, you know, I'm an old English teacher. They gave me a podium and a text. So I decided I'm just going to take about 30, 40 minutes to work you through this, after which there will be a quiz. No, I am delighted, and we're so honored to have Brother Gerard here with us. I told him when I came in that I only know him through his film career. Thus far. I've seen him many, many times on videotape, and I'm delighted that this presentation is going to be videotaped so that other Lasallians around the world will be able to hear what he has to say to us here at Manhattan College this afternoon. The circular is wonderful. The circular is timely. It's something that all of us, I think, are going to benefit greatly from. I'm delighted to have it. And I'm more delighted, even than that, to have such expert guidance through interpretation and facilitation of its use for us. So thank you all for being here. I look forward to the presentation. Thank you, Brother Gerard. It's an honor to have you here. And let's have a wonderful discussion of this text.
Thank you. Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God. O Lord, we thank you for your blessings upon each of us who are present here this afternoon. We are gathered now to hear from Brother Gerard Rummery, an expert on the life, spirituality, and pedagogical contributions of St. John Baptist de La Salle. God of love and wisdom, we thank you for the numerous benefits we Lasallians have received from Brother Gerard over the years, from his talks, books, and articles related to our founder. We ask you to continue to lead Brother Gerard and each of us to even more fully understand the wisdom of St. LaSalle and how you want it to impact our lives. Strengthened by this understanding, may we live so as to bring your love and wisdom to our students and to one another. And this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen. St. John Baptist de La Salle,
pray for us.
Lord Jesus in our hearts.
Forever.
And I now ask Mr. William Galt, Vice Principal of St. Peter's, Staten Island, to make our introduction.
Good afternoon. Our guest this afternoon, Brother Gerard Rummery, has distinguished himself as a leading scholar and lecturer on topics dealing with the Institute, catechesis, the Church, as well as the global Lasallian family. Born and raised in Australia, I think you'll note from the accent, his association with the Lasallian community began with his own grade school and secondary school education at a Lasallian school in Sydney. He completed the novitiate and scholasticate in 1950, and shortly thereafter, he began teaching at De La Salle School in Melbourne. He also pursued his own studies, earning degrees from Melbourne University and a master's in education from Sydney University. Further studies led him to postgraduate work at London University, as well as earning a PhD from Lancaster University, following research and studies in France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. Brother Gerard was a professor at the Catholic College of Education in Sydney before he was called to Rome as a staff member and director of SIL, the Lasallian International Center. In 1986, he was elected to the General Council and re-elected 7 years later, completing 2 terms of office as a General Counselor. Brother Gerard was a foundation teacher of the Buttermere Institute for 20 years, as well as a teacher and lecturer for several cohorts of the Lasallian Leadership Institute, where many of us were blessed to have met his acquaintance. He currently serves as an adjunct professor at the Australian Catholic University, as well as a researcher with Lasallian Educational Services in Melbourne, Australia. He continues to lecture and publish on all things Lasallian. His recent publication is a book titled Brothers to One Another, and quoting from the Institute's website, it states, "It is an inspiring story of courage and strength about brothers in Romania, Czech, and Slovakia, as well as Hungary between 1948 and 1990. Brother Gerard is a gentle soul whose knowledge and wisdom will continue to inspire and grace the Institute and thousands of Lasallians locally and internationally for many years to come. My fellow Lasallians and associates, it is my distinct honor and privilege to introduce this gentle soul, our brother, Gerard Rummery, FSC.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Well, my dear fellow Lasallians, once again, it's very nice. It's very nice to be here. I felt like saying it's lovely to see so many old faces, but I didn't mean that. I meant to say, see all these faces of people with whom I had the privilege of being a teacher over quite some years. I think this evening, what I plan to do is this. You're looking at something that says John Baptist de La Salle, a heritage. I always prefer heritage rather than tradition. Tradition can become a straitjacket. Oh, Carruthers, we've never done it that way before. No, heritage is something you are heirs to. And what I thought we should do is, first of all, recall what are we heirs to. We're going to look at a very short presentation, which is going to tell the story of John Baptist de La Salle. Very simply, about 8 minutes only, so no time to go to sleep. And we'll take the story from today, from 331 years ago, to the present day. The life of John Baptist de La Salle. The life of John Baptist de La Salle, written in 1734, should have been about a man from a prominent Reims family whose social background and wealth led him to high honours in the French church of the 17th century. After all, someone who was made a canon of the Reims Cathedral before his 16th birthday, a student at Saint Sulpice, and a doctor of theology at 30, was surely going to be prominent. Yet we know that through meeting a devoted schoolteacher of the poor, de La Salle the man became a saint, who devoted his life to the education of poor boys in Reims, Paris, Rouen, Grenoble, and many other places throughout his native France. Because poor parents could not pay teachers, their children had little prospect of any schooling and social improvement. As de La Salle came to realize this, he was challenged about his life, his personal wealth and security, so that eventually he gave up his family home to move in with the first teachers he was training, resigned his canonry and the money that went with it, and in the severe winter of 1683-1684, with his own hands he gave away his personal wealth in providing food for the poor in Reims. The artist depicting how de La Salle followed the gospel literally in giving away his wealth to the poor has chosen not to show us the angry reality of starving people struggling to get food, but rather the way in which this extraordinary event conferred human dignity on all who took part in it, those who gave, those who received. This gospel-inspired event became the foundation stone of the very first teaching brotherhood in the Catholic Church. In 1694, we find him with schools in Paris and vowing, with 12 of his brothers, to associate himself with them for the rest of his life for the Christian education of poor boys. By this action, he becomes the founder of the brothers. From now on, his personal journey is linked with the brothers, who will call him father and founder. But opposition came from all kinds of people. His own archbishop rebuked him for living with a group of laymen so far below the social status into which he had been born. People opposed him for teaching children to read in their native French rather than in Latin, as had been the custom. Teachers' groups in Paris saw themselves threatened by his gratuitous schools open to all, even when some of the families could have paid. Twice his Paris schools were invaded and ransacked, and de La Salle himself had to face legal tribunals in which he was condemned for what he and his brothers were doing. This new brotherhood needed its own justification, So we find de Lasalle writing the books needed to train his brothers, pedagogical books, religious books, practical manuals to help children learn their own native language, books of meditations to inspire, encourage and support those who would become educators of the young. We see him depicted here in his 60s, teaching at Grenoble, aging and suffering illnesses, still inspired by the mystery of the cross, steadfast as he undoubtedly remembered events he had written in 1694 in his memoir of the beginnings. God, who is so good and who does not force our inclinations, wishing to engage me in the work of the schools, did so in an imperceptible way and over a long period of time, so that one commitment led to another which I had never foreseen at the beginning. At times he must have reflected how he had walked with his first group of brothers on pilgrimage through the night from Rheims to the shrine of Our Lady of Liesse to place their brotherhood under Mary's patronage. How often he must have been embarrassed to remember that these men, who in his own words he had first considered lower than his own personal servant, were now his brothers, associated with him to continue the work he had been led to begin. He knew each of them by name. They had become his new family, and he exchanged letters with each one every month. We see him remembering the innovative classroom he and his brothers created in Paris. How well it had succeeded in the eyes of all those involved in it, with its long benches and the pupils seated in rank according to the lesson they were following. Here there was order, system and method provided by the teachers, his brothers, whom he had so carefully trained. Death came when he was 68 years of age, but he was able to tell his followers how God had led and guided him at every step of the way for nearly 40 years. His legacy was there with his 100 brothers. It was there for later generations, for us, in his innovative writings, the conduct of schools, his meditations, his best-selling politeness book, The Brother's Rule of Life. For he proved himself through his writings to be a founder of a movement, something that has outlived him to the present and continues to show itself resilient and open to change, just as he and his brothers were in the very beginning. We continue to meet him today, over 300 years later, in many different places he could never have imagined. In a classroom in Africa, in an advanced technical school for the poor in France, in the reminiscences of a brother who has served in his native United States, in the Philippines, in Bethlehem University and in Kenya, in the dedicated lives of all those today who are being older brothers and sisters to young people in need, in refugee Vietnamese brothers instructing the children of refugees in California, in the work of many thousands of lay partners involved in the Lasallian mission of human and Christian education in India, and in more than 80 countries today outside of his native France. In 1900, John Baptist de Lasalle was declared a saint. In 1950, he was declared patron saint of all those who work in the field of education. The man who looked with pity on the plight of the poor in 1680 continues to inspire thousands of educators who work, associated together in the Lasallian mission of human and Christian education for the educational service of the poor in today's world. Well, we've all seen the same 8-minute film. We've all now seen de Lasalle's life compressed into that, from there to the present day. Just spend a few moments talking to people around about you. What struck you about the film? Might be interesting for us just to listen to different things that struck people. We won't comment much on them unless there's something to be commented on. So, anybody like to say something? Yes.
The radical nature of deciding to educate the poor struck both of us. In the sense of, it is hard to imagine the context in which he worked, but the idea that to reach out and to work with the poor and to arm them with knowledge, I think was extraordinary. And what he had to sacrifice, priesthood, that kind of thing.
And how interesting that in the 18th century they get attacked violently by the philosophe. Voltaire asked that they send some of these brothers to pull his ploughs. He doesn't want them. Where will all this lead, one of the philosophes asks. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Well, like most pioneers, he had to try and show people that there was another way of doing things. And generally people said, but we've never done that. The whole teaching of French, teaching in French. How strange that people said, we haven't done this before, we always teach them in Latin. It's easy for them to understand Latin because it's easy to pronounce. He says, no, they're going to learn French. And they learn French according to the principles of the first Academy Dictionary of 1693. So that a French author in 1989, writing about the history of the French language, some of you here historians will remember that the major problem in the French Revolution, besides losing your head, was the fact that all the people in these delegations couldn't understand one another. They all spoke dialect. Not all of them. Some of them spoke French. But a lot of them spoke dialect. Hence these different clubs you get in the French Revolution. This author writes, probably the greatest single influence in the development of a uniform French accent came from the schools of the brothers, who wherever they taught according to the principles of the 1693 Academy Dictionary. What an extraordinary gift that was. No, that's just incidental. Okay, so far we've been in the past. I'm interested that we actually decided to go all the way to the present. I must be the only one interested in that. Jim?
As continuing to teach English, I think English needs to be taught today. I'm teaching an extension course for a college, and I have adults, and they don't know how to write a sentence, or a paragraph, or an essay, and they're completely befuddled by a story.
So there are implications that flowed. Yes, okay. Any other comment about taking to the present? Yes.
In many ways, nothing's really changed. The poor may look different. They may be refugees. They may be living in inner cities, but nothing's changed really. And it just, I think, re-echoes Chapter 10 in the rule. The need for the institute is very, very great.
Okay. Interesting, isn't it, that here's something. Today, you see, if you look at the 82 or 3 countries where we're still represented throughout the world, if you think about it from a French viewpoint, God spoke French. But the French brothers who went into Asia in 1852, supplemented then by the brothers coming here from the States who were Irish and German and Polish and all sorts of things, they actually spoke in English, learnt English. This movement has transcended languages, cultures, religions, and as I look around this room, gender. When I began teaching in 1951, we had 21 brothers in the community, and we had 1 woman of the other sex. Who taught grade 3 naturally. She was well down, something like that. So what is there about this that's actually made it carry across all these different things? Why are we teaching, for example, probably among the religious congregations, we're teaching probably more Muslims than anybody else in the world. What is there about this that sort of... That's really, I think, one of the reasons, I suppose that largely comes out of my own experience of having had the privilege of actually visiting the brothers and their works in every continent. And realizing many different times in my life, that doesn't matter where you get out of the plane in some remote part of Africa, the school you're going to see or the work you're going to see is the same. There's something about it. You know, the moment you get there and are there a few hours, it's the same. Some culture has carried right across these different cultures, languages, religions, gender. And that, I think, says there's some very, very strong foundation stone to it. I think the foundation stone, part of the foundation stone, was that decision of John Baptist de La Salle in 1686 to say to this group of nondescript teachers, what do you want to call yourselves? Because the word they were calling themselves by was the French word maître, masters. And they said, we want to call ourselves brothers. And then they said, we want to be brothers to one another and older brothers to the young people. And the French says, à nous confier par Dieu, confided to us by God. Older brothers, brothers to one another, older brothers to the young people. It's a vision of education which is about relationship. It's about relationship. It's about relationship. Excuse the broken record. But that's what's so interesting about it. There's some anthropological foundation stone there that transcends languages, cultures, religions. And that ties up into a whole lot of other things. It ties up, for example, into the great discussion for a day and a half when we were writing the 1986 rule, now we're trying to supersede, on the discussion of, well, what's the institute, what's the mission of the institute? And people said it is this, and that. But the people in the rule had said it is the human and Christian education of young people. And all the Latins, well, most of the Latins, general term here, for all Spaniards, Italians, Portuguese, etc., jumped up and said, you don't need the word human. Christian education is the full education, obviously. St. Thomas Aquinas says so, therefore it must be true. And everybody went through this debate. I know this vividly because I happened to be in the chair. That's why I know how much this went backwards and forwards. And David, you might remember this too. So we go through this for a whole day, and then we go through. Next morning, some of the people from Asia spoke. And they said, our education is a human education given by Christians. It's given in a spirit of Christianity. It's given as our gospel presence among people whom we love and serve, etc. Whom we don't baptize, whom we don't convert. We're there as a Christian presence to give them something that they didn't have. When my brothers went to Malaysia in 1852, there was one school. It was the famous school in Singapore, which still exists, you see. It was Raffles, named after, of course, the founder of Singapore. And you go to the Raffles Hotel and have a gin sling, if you like, even today. But there were no other school. So the brothers opened a school and said, anybody can come to this school. And if your religion is different, doesn't matter, your religion won't be interfered with, we'll respect everything, etc. So that as I sat on the Penang golf course in 1900 and, goodness me, about 1990 it must have been, I think, back in the last millennium, yes it was. Here we are celebrating 140 years of the brothers in Malaysia. And the Chief Justice stands up and he says, I think I was the first Buddhist pupil in this particular school of the brothers. And he said, if I'm a better Buddhist, he said, it's because I went to this school. He remains a Buddhist, etc. So I think the people from Asia reminded us a very important way. It was first of all about the human, yes, and Christian, because that's what we are, that's the spirit in which we teach, but it's about the two things. You can say they're one, but in a country where you're a visitor and where you're not part of the major religious, etc., that's what you're offering. And this human and Christian, I think, is a very, very important thing for us to keep in mind, because it reminds us that in De La Salle's school, the young people spent 6.5 hours each day. And one half of the hour of the day, at the end of the day, those who have ever taught religion, imagine teaching religion at the last period of the day. However, that's when they did it. But the other 6 hours were spent reading, writing, arithmetic, politeness, everything else you can imagine. Elementary navigation for the children who lived in Calais and Boulogne, because they were fisher folk and needed to know how to get back to port. Before the French Revolution, down in Marseille, they added teaching Italian and teaching Spanish, because these people were not learning Latin and Greek, they were learning how to work in offices that needed people who could do double entry bookkeeping and read and write. It's an education about needs. What do they need? What can we offer them because of their need? So that's one aspect of it. That's why, deliberately why, in simply scripting this, I said we go back to the beginning, but we take it through to the present day. Because, as one of the French historians asks himself the question, why did de La Salle succeed when his contemporaries, predecessors, didn't? And he answers his own question by saying he launched a movement. And the French word mouvement is a stronger political word, perhaps, than the English word. It's like that idea of a stone thrown into the lake where the ripples go and they go and they go and they go. And that's what we're witnessing in the existence of the Lasallian movement in so many countries today. As you read the circular, you will have noticed Brother Alvaro saying that we attained our greatest number of brothers ever in 1966. What was it, 16,743 and a half, or some statistic anyhow like that. And then he points out that ever since that time we have declined in numbers and declined and declined and declined, etc. And the number of Lasallian works today is greater than it was in 1966. There's something about this movement which is infectious, which has gone on, touched other people, like so many of you here today, and that's why it goes on. The origins of that, I think, are what we're going to look at next, because we're talking about something called association. And I'll just take this PowerPoint through, etc. I'm going to talk about association at three distinct times. I'm sorry we can't all see. Can we all see that? Or if not, I'll sort of shout it out louder and I'll tell you what I'm dealing with. I'm going to talk about it at three different moments. About 1641, long before I was born even, 1691 and 1694. Then we're going to talk about it today. Then we'll talk about some implications for it. Okay, so let's begin. We're back in Vaugirard, a famous name for the brothers, where because the place was so poor they nearly all starved or froze to death. Still, Vaugirard still exists in Paris. It's now the meat works, by the way, but anyhow, that's a... And in 1641, Jean-Jacques Ollier, the founder of the Society of Saint-Sulpice, and two companions began community life. This is now from his life. Their idea was to work towards the establishment of a seminary in spite of the collapse of a previous attempt. The Council of Trent had said we must have seminaries to train priests, because prior to this time priests were not trained. You studied your theology, you were ordained, and off you went. These people are trying to say, well, listen, we need to train them because they need to be something more than just head people who know theology. And the biography goes on to say, to judge according to the rules of human prudence, this foundation seemed completely unreasonable. It was quite rash to go and attempt such a difficult work in a dilapidated village without any temporal support. So, what do? So, the story goes on. The three resolve join together in God's service and form a society. A society. Association. A society. Socius. Somebody who works with you. As the aim they set themselves was to procure the glory of the Most Holy Trinity by the means of priests, they decided to take as their model that of the three divine persons, taking divine love as their sole bond without any vow, as Father Condron himself had. This is all from his biography. So they're going to take some way of, they're going to make this work by fair means or foul, etc. So what do? So on the 21st of November, the day when the clergy had to dedicate themselves for the next year, they went on pilgrimage to Montmartre, which was that hilltop outside Paris before that present basilica was there, and consecrated themselves to the Most Blessed Trinity with the promise to stay together and work for the instruction and sanctification of the clergy, a task yet to be done, completed. They did so in these terms in a statutory declaration before a notary. They don't take a vow. They go to a notary and say, and bind themselves in law. 3 priests binding themselves, called in unity of mind to the service of God and the Holy Church, to train for him ministers to serve his greatness worthily, believe that in honour of the divine society of the 3 persons, they should unite by a holy promise never to leave one another, nor to give up the plan that he has pleased God to show them. That's what they do. Bind themselves in law to make this succeed. And we know that Ollier did succeed, and the Society of Saint-Sulpice was founded, and the Sulpicians exist today in this country. Okay, so all of this takes place in 1641 in Vaugirard. And we're reminded that in 1691, 50 years later, de La Salle is in Paris, and he finds out that 8 of the 16 brothers in Reims have decided not to be brothers anymore, and then only 1 novice has turned up, and there's a whole crisis. And he wonders what he's going to do. And he believes at this stage that, well, he clings to his faith, that the society was God's work, and that with faith in the brothers that God had given him, they should do something. So this is what they do. On this same day, 50 years later, from what Ollier had done, de La Salle takes 2 companions who have been with him for a long time, Nicolas Vuillard, Gabriel Drolin, the one who spent all that time in Rome, and they make a vow to found the society, even if only one of them was left to do so, if they had to beg for food to stay alive. And what's important is that this was not known to the rest of the brothers. We only know this when Drolin spends all these years in Rome, comes back, and he tells the story. Okay, what do they actually vow then? This is too small for you to see, I'm sorry, I thought we might have had a bigger screen, but anyhow, they say, we consecrate ourselves entirely to you, to God, particularly with all our power and all our care, the establishment of the society of the Christian schools, in the manner that appears to us, to be, excuse this jumping round, to be the most agreeable to you and the most advantage to the society. And therefore they name themselves and they say, from this moment on until the last survivor, or till the establishment of the said society, we make a vow of association and union to bring about and maintain the said establishment. And de La Salle here is copying, obviously, what Ollier had done. Why did he do this? Or how do we... Well, it's interesting that it was only in 1983, one of our great scholars, Brother Maurice Auguste, was looking up something on Ollier, and he went to our library in Rome, and he found a book, like many of the French books of the time, which you cut the page as you went along. Some of you of a certain age might remember that. Others won't believe it could have been possible, but it was. And he found this Life of Ollier, but it had only been cut a certain number of pages. So he started to cut more pages, and he found this story. And this is the first time we ever realised that what de La Salle did on the 21st of November 1691 was a sheer copy of what Ollier had done 50 years before. And some brother said, So it wasn't a very heroic vow, he was just imitating somebody else. Well, I don't know. I saw it rather differently. We know that he always took advice. He was a great friend of where he studied with the Sulpicians. We know that he went to a priest called Father Beauyn, B-E-A-U-Y-N, and said, what do I do? And apparently Beauyn must have said to him, I don't know what you do, but this is what Ollier did. And that's what they do. And they found the society. Okay. Well then, 3 years later, de La Salle takes 12 people and they each write out this formula of vows. And they make a vow of association. This time now, this is for life. And a vow of obedience, and that they will do this for the rest of their lives. And we have here that is exactly what de La Salle wrote. We have that actual copy in our archives. What's interesting about the way they do the thing, though, is this. Each one, first of all, they make the vow to the Most Holy Trinity, etc., as Catholics, Christians. It's I consecrate myself entirely to you. The other vow was we. To procure your glory as far as I'm able and as you will require of me. And for this purpose, I, John Baptist de La Salle, priest, promise and vow to unite myself and remain in society with brothers Nicolas Vuilla, Gabriel Drolin, Jean Patois, Gabriel Chabrasica, Jean-Henri, Jacques Compin, Jean Jacot, Jean-Louis de Macheville, Michel Barthélemy Jacquinot, Edmond Léguillon, Gilles Pierre, and Claude Risset. Each one names the other. And we have all the other copies in the archives, where they've all written down de La Salle's name, and then the other 11. They bond, they form a society, they associate themselves. And what do they associate themselves for? To keep together and by association gratuitous schools, schools for the poor, schools that are absolutely free so the poor can come to them. Wherever I may be sent, even if I should be obliged in order to do so to beg alms and live on bread alone, or to do in the said society what I shall be given to do, whether by the body or by the superiors who are in charge of it. So I promise and vow obedience, etc., association and stability. And that is the vow that they make. Okay, when we move on from here, we can contrast the two. First of all, the heroic vow is 3 people make it together. The second one, they do it together, but each one says I and names the other 11. It's a bonding, very important bonding exercise. And I won't go into all the details of this, which are interesting, but a little bit to save our time. So, and then the thing, as they finish the formula, they say, I promise and vow obedience, whether to the body of the society or to the superiors, which vows whether of association or stability, meaning for the rest of my life, in the said society, I promise to keep inviolably all my lifetime. So the 3 vows are association, obedience, and stability. But when de La Salle is dead and the brothers go to Rome to get approval of the society, because they have no approval either of church or of state, they have to present this kind of new thing to the cardinals who don't really understand who they are. So the cardinals say, we know, for example, that the cardinals approve this along with a number of other things. There are 38 things they approve in 2 days. We know this from the minutes of the meetings. Now, we don't have any transcript of what they said, but we can imagine the transcript of something like this. Who are these people? Oh, well, they're French. Oh, I see. Oh, well, they're French. Yeah, that's right. but they're men. Yeah, they're men, yeah. And they teach. Yeah, okay. So they're educated. Yeah, that's right, yes. They live in community. Yes. And their rule says they don't want to be priests. Yeah. What's wrong with them? Well, they must be monks. Well, okay, well, it doesn't mention anything about poverty, chastity, and obedience. It doesn't mention the typical poverty, chastity, and obedience of monks, but, well, let's give them poverty, chastity, and obedience, and they can have these other little things they put in those frills. What's that? Association? What's this association? So they approve us. Holy Spirit, you know, Christians believe work in strange ways. Well, they approve us and we become a religious congregation. Did de La Salle intend us to be a religious congregation? We don't know, he never said. There's enough evidence to suggest that he intended us to be, if that was God's providence. But anyhow, we get approved and we go on merrily, etc. We get suppressed in the French Revolution and we come alive again in 1805. Napoleon invites us back because the kids are running wild in the streets. So he invites us back. You can teach grade schools. You can only have grade schools. You can't do anything else. And you come under the control of the university. So we begin. We start with 75 brothers who answer the call. We're suppressed in 1792. And in those years, from the next 13 years or so, a lot of brothers, because their whole society is dismissed, they've all been given a certain amount of money after the sale of properties to actually go away and do something else. Some of them have been married, some of them, I suppose, die. Eventually, when the brothers come back to Lyon, They're clever. They don't come back to Paris yet. Paris is a little bit, you know, always uncertain, even today. So, so they come back to Lyon, and they sent out a message saying, listen, we're back. And 75 brothers eventually turn up in the next 2 years who haven't married and who want to start again. And then they get a letter from a group in Reims saying, who the hell are you? We've been here all the time. There are about 10 of them round Reims who've been working away quietly, didn't have their habits on, but they taught schools and etc. In the cathedral city of Laon, L-A-O-N, beautiful cathedral city, when the red caps in the revolution said, no, we can't, no, we're going to close this school, the parents revolted and said, who's going to teach our kids? Oh, well, all right, well, provided they don't wear those habits, they can teach. So you still have, right next to the cathedral, Rue des Frères. It's where the brothers continued to teach, right through the revolution. But they come back, 75, eventually they become about 150, around about 1810, and by the end of the century, they're 15,000. Goes like that. And from France, in the 1830s, they go to Canada. In the 1840s, they come here. In the 1850s, they go to Asia. Then we go through to 1904, 1905, when they bring down the anti-clerical laws, and you can no longer live in community, you can't wear a religious habit, you can't run a school as a Catholic school, and nearly 7,000 brothers of the 11,500 brothers in France say, if that's the case, we're going somewhere else. The superior looks at what's happening and he says, when a great ship is sinking, it's every man for himself. He's a great mathematician, Gerard Rummery, but he wasn't exactly the man to inspire much confidence. So off they go. They go everywhere. They go into Spain, they go into Switzerland, they go into Germany, they go everywhere. Well, they're in Germany long before that. They go to Central and Latin America. And they go and courageously learn other languages, etc. like that. 1914 comes, they all get the call up to come back and fight for La Belle France. If they acknowledge the fact that they were called up to fight for La Belle France and say, yes, yes, I'd love to come, but sorry, I'm down here in Chile or Peru or Bolivia, if they tick you off on the list. You've responded. If you never respond, your name is kept on the list. So 1933, a French brother, world expert in botany, is invited to Hitler's great botanical feast in Berlin. He's a world expert. As he comes down the gangplank, you see in Normandy at Le Havre, he's arrested because he's never answered the call-up. He's put into prison. We have to intercede at the highest level to get him out. And he makes quite sure after the Congress in Berlin he doesn't go back via La Belle France. All of this is important because somewhere in this whole thing, the dispersal of the Institute takes place through an event they can't control. But that's why we're in the 83 countries today. It's a very interesting sort of reading of, it's not through expansion like IBM at all. It's just through the fact that, okay, we can't do it here, we'll do it somewhere else. So, when you look at the circular, I know not all of you will have read it, so I'm just going to signpost you through a few things. It's interesting that the subtitle is An Act of Hope. So without giving the show away, I wonder what the act of hope is. What do you think the real meaning of act of hope is?
Well, even though throughout the world we have reasons to be very worried about the work of the brothers and the work of the Lasallian schools, not everywhere, but many places, we still hope and believe that, because I think hope really means belief in a difficult situation.
Okay.
Despite these difficulties, we believe that the work will go on and the Lord will take care of it.
Okay. Some people would say an act of hope is that tomorrow 1,000 young men will come and join the brothers. No, that's not what it's about at all. title of the... So that's how the circular appears. Associated for the Lasallian mission, an act of hope. Okay. Those who had the chance to read it so far will remember how the lesson develops. I'm just going to concentrate on 5 things. Association exists for the mission. Okay? Clear, unambiguous. We don't associate, for the World Drinking Contest or anything else like that. We associate because of something that we believe is a mission, something we're sent to do. Okay? Right. What else? Why else do we associate? Association implies being a member of a community. I've deliberately added a sort of quotation mark to community because I think it's important for us to nut out a little bit what that might mean. Does it mean you've got to be tied to a brother's community? Or linked to a brother's community? Know their telephone number or something? But I'd like to venture what it might mean. I don't mean the answer's there in the circular, as you know, but why does it say it implies being a member of a community?
It matters how you define community.
Okay. So it's within quotation marks. Lois?
I think there's a sense that the mission is served by association, and association, across time, is something about relationships and people being in relationship with one another.
Okay.
Because that's the thing that will keep the mission going.
Okay. We throw ourselves back again to the question of 1686. What do you want to call yourselves? We want to call ourselves brothers. What are you going to do as brothers? We're going to be brothers to one another. We're going to be older brothers to the young people God sends us. That's the anthropological cornerstone of everything, I suggest. So that being part of a community means that you work with other people. Doesn't mean you share necessarily the same house, that you live together, but in some way you are bonded with other people. And is this bonding simply, well, we're all within the same geographical space? How do you actually indicate, how do you actually show yourself as a member of a community? I mean, this is the kind of challenge, isn't it, that's there in the expression, and the circular takes this up and suggests various possibilities. But it's the sense of not working in isolation, of not just being a lone ranger, that you're going to work better when you're working with other people, and that this kind of thing is one where you're going to help one another, and in that sense be the older sister, older brother to the young people. Sometimes we know, so often, that the kind of person you're teaching or the student you have, the one you don't get along with, somebody else may get along with very well. And it's that kind of a thing. What does the community offer? Well, the strength of the community, etc., is very often the person is willing to say, look, I'm having a lot of difficulty with this lad. How are you getting on with him? Do you think you might be able to, etc. It's that kind of a thing. It's the willingness, it's the gratuity, you see. For a long time in the 19th century, the brothers in France struggled with gratuity in terms of money, just as you have to today. But gratuity, that foundation idea of gratuity, is such a profound value when you think about it. It's where you do something not because you're going to be paid for it, but because you believe it's worth doing. Let me give you an example. Having escaped back to Australia after 23 years in Rome, you see, Brother Pablo rang me at midnight one night and said good morning, and I said, well, yes, it's actually midnight. He asked, well, will you come back to Rome, etc. So I said, well, I'm doing this, that, and have you talking to the brother visitor? That is not very important, he said. Anyhow, he said, so I asked, how long would it be? 3 years, he said. So I came back for 3 years, and after 3 years, I was made director of the program. And then so my 3 years became 23. So having escaped back to Australia and having taken up golf again, etc., I got some sunspots. So doctor sent me off to know, the man you need to see is so-and-so. He's an Indian doctor, very hard to get into, but... So I rang, no, 3 months delay. He said, oh, well, there's another doctor. So I went to this other doctor. It so happened this other doctor was sick and the Indian doctor was taking his place. So he said to me, brother, oh, brother, what kind of a brother are you? I said, I'm de La Salle brother, as we say in Australia. And he said, oh. He said, I went to your school, he said, in Melbourne. I came from Fiji, he said, and I came to this school, he said, and he said, I was completely behind, he said, in maths and physics. And brother, there was a brother there called Brother Mark, he said. And after a couple of weeks, he came to me one day and said, listen, you come to me every Saturday morning and I'll coach you in math and physics. Brother, he did it for the whole year. Every Saturday, he said, taught me alone. And I graduated with the rest of the class. Now, I wouldn't be here treating you today if it wasn't for Brother Mark. I suppose he's dead now. I said, he lives in my community. And he said, next time you come, you must bring him with you. And I did. Gratuity. What did he get from it? Brother Mark didn't get any extra pay. He missed all the morning football matches, all that whole year. But that young man, that's what gratuity is about. It's about what you do without hope of reward. It's the extra moment you spend with the difficult student. It's all of those things. Yes, it can be financial as well, as we know. It's the kind of thing parts of the Philippines where they ask people, what can they actually pay for the tuition? And some people say, well, look, we can pay so much. But we know some of these people, but we're willing to pay a bit more so that these people can come to school. That's gratuity. That's the challenge the Filipino brothers have put up in a number of places. So that all in some way, the gratuity works in all sorts of... So, next sort of thing that the circular goes on to talk about is, say, association comes from experience. It's dynamic, not an acquired status. If you look at the, further on in the circular, they go back to the year 2000, when we were looking at this whole question, and when we were into... It was a general chapter, so we had to make certain decisions. And we fell into a whole kind of way of describing, well now, how do associates differ from partners or from colleagues or from also-rans and from etc., etc. And we made up also an associate as somebody recognised by the Visitor and Council as having, you know, good life, sober, you know, usually sober anyhow, etc. It was a dreadful mistake, dreadful mistake. It's not about status at all. Association is something that you grow into if you feel you want to be part of this. It's the sense of belonging that you're willing to actually work with other people. And that's part of the gratuity of association as well. It doesn't have entrance fees and departure fees. It has this sense of what I'm prepared to give, etc. It's not an acquired status. Okay, circular goes on to say, association comes from faith, vocation and state of life. I put faith in with commas around it because sometimes we think, well, is he church attending? Was he at Mass last Sunday? Is he Catholic? That's not the question. Let me try and illustrate it this way. I'm invited to Multan in Pakistan some years ago to give a workshop for 3 days with the staff. The staff is probably about 90-something. There are 6 brothers. There are probably another 4 or 5 Christians, one of whom is Catholic. I think the others were, you'd call Episcopalian or Methodist. All the rest are Muslim. So I think, well, what do I give the workshop on? So I decided I would give it on gratuity. And I survived without being, you know, hung, drawn, quartered, so that was all right. And 2 years later, I came back to the same place, and the director said to me, you really left me a problem last time you were here. And I said, oh, what was that? He said, you remember that tall Pathan woman who teaches English? I said, yes. Very handsome woman, I can remember her quite well. He said, you ask her. So at the coffee break, I said, oh, nice to see you again. I believe I left you a problem last time. And she smiled and said, brother, she said, well, it was like this. She said, I got my education through the sisters. And because of the sisters, I earned a scholarship to an English university. But my husband came through the brothers' school, and he got a scholarship to the same university, and we met and married. He became a doctor, and we lived for 10 years in Belgium and made lots of money. Always conscious, because we're practicing Muslims, that we were the 2% of Pakistanis who get a tertiary education. We came back to give something back to our country. So when you talked about gratuity, I was very embarrassed, because we're living well, we have money. But you see, in the Quran it says, if you have more than you need, give to those who have less. So after you left, I went to Brother Director and said, look, I don't want to receive my salary in future. I want my salary to go to the fund for needy students. And the director said, well, that complicates life. You can do that yourself. No, she said, each time I cross the threshold of this school, I want to know that I am teaching for the love of Allah, blessed be his name. And for the next 14 years, that's what she did. But she was a Muslim. Was she a Lasallian teacher? Well, she was in my book. Came from her faith, that's what she brought to it. So much of what we're doing in interreligious dialogue, which will become which is still, I think, one of our major things in all societies today, is we exchange gifts with one another. We bring the gift of our own faith, of our own vision, to the other person, and we share it with them. Not in the sense of saying, therefore it's better than yours, and therefore you become... No, it's to say, but besides giving what we have, we also receive. I learned something very important from that woman. And that's what this is about. It comes from faith, from a sense of calling, that you want to do this. It's not just a meal ticket. It can be that, but it's more than that. It comes from a state of life. My obligation, if I'm a married person, I have my husband, wife, children, all these things, this is my prime thing. But what I can offer also, in another sense, is what I can offer. So it's this kind of thing. People will come to this in many different ways. One has to recognize that it's not one path. And so lastly, you say, I think yes. Association presupposes some kind of freely made commitment. If you associate and you deliberately want to be something, part of something where you're willing to work with others and perhaps spend time with them, so on like that, then you do this because you believe it's worth doing and you commit yourself to do it. It doesn't happen by accident. And that's why I think all of this, I think, is in view of a future which I don't quite see at the moment. I don't know what this future is. But I'm often reminded of Don Bosco, when you make your next visit to Rome, make sure as you go down the main aisle of the St. Peter's Cathedral, look up and see de La Salle and see who's next to him. Don Bosco, wonderful priest, chaplain to the Brothers' School in Santa Barbara in Turin, one who learnt a great deal from de La Salle, so much that, as one famous occasion, Don Bosco became quite famous. One of the brothers who'd been in that school, now retired, went to see him and said, where did you learn all this stuff about prevenient care, like getting in before the problem starts? And Don Bosco said, it's all here in your book, he said. 12 Virtues of a Good Master, of Brother Agathon. Anyhow, Don Bosco in 1868 decided that his congregation, he'd get it approved by the church. So he proposes, he goes to see the cardinals, he writes his, etc. He wants a congregation composed of priests, brothers, sisters and lay people. The cardinals all collapse and have to be revived with smelling salts. So it never happens. It never happens. But you see, I wonder what the Lasallian movement is today. I wonder who makes up the Lasallian movement. Priests, yes, we have lots of priests who teach with us. Sisters, yes, lots of sisters teach with us. We have 2 sisters' congregations linked into the brothers in some way or another. Lots of women, lots of men. There's a not yetness about where we are at the moment, which I think is very important. And that not yetness, I think, challenges us in another way. So, final lap. One of these little doors they have in Rome. It's the Church of the 12 Apostles. The little man guarding it, you see there, he's actually full size, but anyhow. And for those who... Doors conceal and protect what's behind them. The first door, which admits us to the Lasallian heritage, invites us to be the best professionals we've always aspired to be. When we offer young people the very best educational service we can, we cross a threshold, which then links us with like-minded Lasallian educators in some 83 countries of today's world. That's the door many of us come through, first of all. There's another door that also opens up. It says, once the door's been opened, we enter into our professional work. We begin to realise that many of our Lasallian colleagues are ready to help us fit in and understand why and how things are done. In Lasallian terms, this is when we experience for ourselves the spirit of community, in quotation marks, doing things together so that all contribute in a real partnership. And then another door opens. From inside the Lasallian heritage, it's much easier to see that just as de La Salle and his brothers over the past 300 years have tried to live by their deep faith in God, a binding force in the Lasallian work is the way in which people in their various ways try to live by the very deep personal principles that guide them in their relationship with one another and with those whom they serve. There may be religious principles, there may be human principles. We have workshops 6 times a year, 1 full week with teachers, and with our Boys Town operation used to be an operation of 12 brothers serving 120 court-committed kids. When the government would no longer support this idea and required us to send the kids back to their environment after 3 weeks, which we laughed at, they would no longer support us. So a very lateral thinking brother said, okay, how do we stop kids getting into the courts? And we took a whole lot of money, which we're allowed to get through lotteries in this particular state, and we founded Kids Helpline for 1 state, so that in the state of Queensland, any kid at any time, day and night, 7 days a week, pick up a phone and speak to a counsellor. That program is now through the whole of Australia, anywhere, anytime. And we have answered, last year we managed to reach 68% of answering calls. We can't cope with it. With 140 trained counsellors, we still can't cope with the volume. People said, you won't need that. Oh, no, there's no need for it. No need for it. Now that that's grown, Parents Helpline, etc. like that. Start of last year, we had somebody from our Boys Town operation then now has diversified into working with single mothers looking after children and so on like that, deserted wives, battered wives, you name it. We have 500 people now working in our organisation. We never had 500 brothers in the province at any time. And many of these people, I'd say, have never been churched. We had one last year. He'd been working with our school with the Aboriginal people, way out in northwest Australia, right on the edge of a desert. We've been there 32 years now. And it's a very difficult thing because once the boy reaches 12, 13, 14, the old men from the tribe come and say, this boy must now go out into the desert. And he disappears for a year or 2 years, comes back very lean, hard, etc. He can't go back into school. He's just been schooled. He's just learned how to survive. He's learned all the lore, L-O-R-E, of the tribe. So gradually we're trying to get these people interested as carpenters and bricklayers, and we're having a bit of success. So working out there was this man who's a carpenter, and he was on our session last year, about this time actually. It was hot weather, as I do in Australia at that time, So he was tattooed, everything you could see, and probably a lot of what you couldn't see was tattooed. Anyhow, but he said to us, "Can I show something about where we work with the Aboriginals?" We said, yes. "I've got some slides," he said. And he put up the slides and he began to talk to them. And I won't quote all the language he used. He said, "These poor bastards," he said, "they haven't got a..." And away he went. And as the slides came up, he choked. And he said, we should all be out there. He said, "I rang my wife and said, 'Joan, you got to come out here.' And she came. 'We're going to stay there,' he said. 'Do what we can.'" Now, I don't think he'd ever been churched in his life, but in terms of sheer human goodness, it probably was the most important thing we did in that whole week. To listen to somebody reaching out to people worse off than himself. It's in that sense, I think, that you come into this operation in various ways. I think those three doors, there might be a lot of other doors as well. But I think what's important about it is that there are three things involved. There's belief in something, maybe belief in human goodness, belief in a fair go for the other person, maybe a deep religious principle of being a good Muslim, being a good Christian, being a good Anglican, etc. It doesn't matter what, but once you get inside, you see all these things are part of it. They're all complementary. One thing helps the other. And that's why I suggest that probably, if you want to belong, I think there are degrees of belonging. And I think the kind of thing that you can expect in any sort of situation, if you're hiring people for a particular kind of work in a school or anywhere else, you can say to them, all right, they put in their professional commitment, professional standards, and you say, all right, well, we expect you to teach physics or teach math or something else like that. We can't say to them, and we expect you also to love the children all the time and love the students and work with everybody else and spend time after school. Oh, no, you can't do any of that. But people might say, yeah, yes, they're things they might have, etc. You can't ask those things, but people may want to offer them gradually. And therefore, I think there's a kind of level of sharing. I think what you can expect from the professional is he's going to do his work, he or she going to do their work, they're going to work with colleagues, it's going to be a good department. You can't demand, but some people may say, well, I do this because I feel I'm called to do it. And I bring to it what I believe in and my principles and so on like that. And all of you here today because in some way you've shared some kind of Lasallian education with other people. So what I say at the end here, for those who can't, it is a sense of belonging helps to build that sense of community which is always stronger than the individuals who compose it. That's the strong sense of together and by association. Brothers and sisters to one another, older brothers and sisters, etc., to the young people whom we're called to serve. So what I've tried to look at today really with you then is the story is an ongoing story. The story continues because there are certain basic human cornerstones which are still there, which are enlivened by the faith, the beliefs that people bring to them. But the strength of the movement is always in the fact that it's not done simply as individuals, that it's done in the sense of a community, always stronger than individuals. Fascinating to see in the history of the brothers in Eastern Europe, which I've been associated with for many years now, that the communists knew that the one thing you couldn't afford to have were religious communities where people lived together. So that after all those places where after 1948, 1950, brothers and sisters were put in prison and work camps and so on like that, once they were released, they were never allowed to live in community. They had to do anything, find any job, but never to live together. They knew that the community strength is always stronger than the individual. And I think that's one of our great resources. That is what it is to be Lasallian. That's my message for today. I'm quite happy to try and answer any questions or Or any observations or comments people would like to offer. That's within a limited time, of course. Not that I'm limited by time, but many of you, most of you are. Yes.
I'm struck, brother, by the association, community, and what you began with about telling us about heritage. And maybe that is our heritage. Maybe that is the basis of it. I work in the public schools for 37 years. I have very little contact with the college that gave me this great education. But I feel that part of that community.
Yes.
But I also have a need to continue to renew that.
Yes.
Do you have any thinking about that?
I think if I look at, say, the analogy which I obviously know, or the comparison which I know best, of course, is living as a brother. The fact that we find it important at least once a year to make a retreat. In fact, spend a time where you go back and you look again at what you're doing and why you're doing it. And sometimes you do this in terms of, it happens through events. It happens through, one always interesting to me, it happens, say, in terms of funerals. I was in Germany recently for the funeral of a great brother who trained as a missionary, learnt English, tried to escape from Germany in 1938, was put into prison for trying to escape. War came, like all the brothers, put into the army, actually went through the Russian front and came home alive, deserted in the last months of the war, came home and restarted the school with nothing. And his funeral was an extraordinary occasion. First of all, there were the alumni, the ones whom he taught. And they were varying ages. Some of them, I would say, quite ancient. But right out young people. This is a famous music school, always has been. The teacher's choir who sang would have graced any concert hall. And they threw that together themselves in tribute to him. Because it's a town of 25,000 or so, everybody was there. The burgomaster, everybody came. I thought, what a wonderful tribute to this one man who came back, found out where a couple of our brothers were, and I've had the privilege of talking with them and hearing some of the stories. How they looked around the room and said, well, we've got 10 people and we're supposed to start school next Monday. This is sort of Saturday. Can anybody teach English? Oh yes, I've been a prisoner of war in England. All right, okay. Well, all right, well you can start. And yeah, well I'm a prisoner of war in the United States. All right, okay. We've only got one book, so you have Mondays, you have Tuesdays and so on like that. That's what they did. They rebuilt the thing. And to me, the greatest tribute that could have been made to the brothers was that in 1991, representing the Institute, we passed the school over because there were no more brothers to come, and at 65 was compulsory retirement. We passed the school over to the Diocese of Augsburg. And the teacher, the head teacher and his head brother, in his final address to the staff, to the faculty, said, look, he said, you must think seriously about what we're going to name the school now. It's been, for these 100 years, Collège de Schulbrüder, College of the Teaching Brothers. Perhaps it should have another name. And the staff said, no, we now are the Schulbrüder. Wonderful tribute. I think in that sense, it's the renewal thing I think is important. Something like this, what we see and the work I work with in Australia, what we're doing, what we're making at the moment are a series of about 6 to 7 minutes things like the life of de Lasalle, which pick up something from the heritage, which doesn't require me or anybody else to be present, but which a school faculty could use as a kind of injection point at the start of a year or a feast day or something like that. Because I think we sometimes need to get we need to be reminded of where we are. And part of that reminding sometimes is being together, to be reminded about it together and to be able to talk about it together. I think that's an important direction. Yes?
Yeah, I think also your presentation tonight is somehow like an affirmation of what each one of us here have, the faith, which made us see the real mission that we have right now where we are.
Yes.
in the Lasallian school.
Right, yes.
And I think because of seeing that mission, we're able to make ourselves belong to
Yes.
that community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think it's the sense of belonging that we were saying before, that we are able to reach
Mm-hmm.
and see others too.
Yes.
And because of that, I could see the development that we can commit.
Yes.
We commit ourselves to that mission.
Right. Because you feel you belong.
That's
But it comes from you. In the 1976 general chapter, when we first began to think about this decline of the brothers and etc., somebody said, well, perhaps in the future, like it's about, are some of these people going to be members of the Institute? Are these lay people? How are we going to? And the discussion went on fairly aimlessly for a little bit, and indeed it was the first time we ever used the word Lasallian family. Very vague expression at the time. What's it mean? And membership. And a very, well, I think very clear, very intelligent French brother stood up and he said, look, it's not a question about membership, he said. It's a question about belonging. And he said, you belong if you give yourself to it. He said, without, he said, wishing to blacken anybody's character here, he said, I think, he said, I teach in a school where some lay people have a deeper sense of belonging than some of the brothers I live with. I think that can be possible. And that sense of what you give and so on, it's not a static, it's not a status, as we said earlier. Something that you give. Right, thank you. Well, the remaining questions can be written, and I'll give written answers to them. Thank you. Now, thank you very much for